Hello and welcome to Staying Ahead of the Curve. I'm Jeff Snyder, Vice President, Senior Consultant with Camac Retirement Group. Today marks our third season of Staying Ahead of the Curve. We're very excited to expand our relationship with Asset TV and looking forward to future and great episodes and bringing it to you, the audience. Today I'm joined by Dan Ramsden. He's Managing Director with Oberon Securities, and Dan focuses on digital technology. Dan, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thanks, Jeff. Glad to be here.
So your focus is on digital technology. You and I have talked offline over the years about this very exciting industry. And I was wondering if you could kind of share for the audience the high level, what's going on, what you're seeing in the marketplace.
Oh, so many things. You know, when we talk about digital technology today, we're really talking about everything. I can't think of a single industry among the traditional sectors that we all think about: healthcare, education, media, retail, etc. It's finance, commerce, that hasn't been at the very least impacted by digital, and at the extreme become a digital business altogether. And this is something that I think about a lot, and many people do. Because the effect of that adoption of digital technology among all of these industries has been the beginning of a convergence that is taking shape very broadly between them. When all industries begin to adopt software and data and digital transmission, not only as a tool, but increasingly as part of the core business, that creates a bond and a bridge almost between these different sectors, which makes it easier and in fact makes it advantageous for companies in individual sectors to branch out into others. And so the effect of that is a convergence, as I said, between different categories. And you're seeing that, for instance, in the convergence of retail, finance, and media, as to some extent personified by Amazon, let's say. You're seeing it in FinTech, which is in many ways the convergence of financial services and media, and certainly technology, which applies to all of these things. You know, more recently, you've got the Internet of Things, which is bringing hardware and software together and digital communication. Automotive is the next big thing, with Tesla and with other companies that are in the automotive sector traditionally, branching out into autonomous vehicles, into electric vehicles, all of which is dependent on digital technology, analytics, data, software, etc. So these are phenomena that we're all seeing that's impacting all of us. And it's very exciting, and I think it has ripple effects and repercussions broadly throughout the economy.
So I was going to make the comment that we are certainly seeing this in the retirement industry, the inclusion of technology. You and I have talked over the years about the interconnectivity and connecting people and users. I wonder if you could go into that a little bit more for the audience. We'll get to data mining in a second, but that interconnectivity, creating an ecosystem, if you will, is kind of the future.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting side effect almost of what we've been talking about. And again, it's something that we're beginning to notice now for the first time. I think if we take a step back, the effect of these transitions and these transformations that I've been mentioning, I think is something along the following lines, where you have on one side, just very broadly speaking, you have products, services, technologies, and these are all individual units, if you will. They're dependent on a continuous reinvention, a continuous series of upgrades. And they have limited lives. They're short-lived and almost commoditized in many cases. On the other side, which is, I think, what you're driving at, is what we can think of as the networks and the platforms. And these can take a number of different manifestations. It can be messaging, it can be connectivity in some fashion, it could be data networks, exchanges in various categories. And the networks, because of their topology, because of their network effects, their clustering, their interdependence on the different nodes within them, are much more difficult to disrupt, are not as dependent on reinvention or continuous upgrade as what's on the other extreme, a product or a service or a technology. And so I think what you're seeing in the market more and more is that the companies that are getting the most recognition in the marketplace from a value perspective are the ones that in fact do offer some kind of network effect, and ideally on multiple dimensions. You know, there was an interesting thing that happened this past summer where for the first time the top 5 companies by market cap were said to be technology companies. Apple, Google or Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook. But if you take a step back and you look at what actually is distinguishing about those 5, is not so much the fact that they're technology companies, because there's lots of technology companies, and moreover, even the non-technology companies are becoming technology companies. But those 5 appear to be networks in various manifestations. And moreover, are networks with multiple dimensions, different offerings, including messaging, different points of connectivity, combinations of hardware and software. So this multidimensionality within the network structure that these companies are building is extremely valuable, and I believe is being recognized as such by the market, and obviously by individuals like you and me who use these services.
Also data, and you mentioned data mining, being able to carve up data. It's something that we're seeing beginning to happen in the retirement industry within retirement plans. But can you elaborate a little bit more on that data mining, how important it is to understand what users are doing and to be able to bifurcate and segment that information for for different uses?
Yeah, I mean, I think increasingly that's what gives a lot of these networks their value, is their access to data, and much more, and not only single data sets, but multiple data sets that, when combined, can create value in an almost exponential fashion because of the levels of depth that these combinations of data sets represent. I think in addition to just the collection of the data, which these networks are able to do, the processing of it through various data analytics algorithms, which is of course an extremely complicated subject, but it's become very advanced. It enables companies to target their consumers, their customers, whoever they may be, in much more creative and pertinent ways. It enables them to understand the marketplace better and better, within limits, realizing that, data are individual, quantifiable points. But there are things that are not necessarily captured by data, or if they are not yet possible to digest through algorithm necessarily. But we're getting better and better, it seems, at all of that. And the leading companies in all the various sectors are becoming the leading companies, it seems, because of their very sophisticated understanding of data applications.
So you talked about these 5 companies kind of ascending in terms of the top 5 companies. Automation is something that we hear about regularly in the media and the press. From a macroeconomic point of view, globally, how is this going to impact, this automation? I mean, how's it going to impact the workforce, labor, et cetera?
Well, that's the that's the perennial question, I guess. There's obviously a great deal of discussion and thinking about robotics and artificial intelligence. It seems that the types of labor that are most exposed to that risk of being disrupted by mechanisms such as robots or artificial intelligence, which go hand in hand, are the types of labor that are more formulaic in nature. By definition, formula can be, at a very minimum, augmented by algorithm, and in some cases replaced altogether. Those parts of the economy that are not subject or less subject to formulaic processing are probably a little bit safer from a labor force disruption perspective. And there's degrees in between the two extremes, right? I mean, to some extent, we're all formulaic, and to some extent, we're all not. So depending on where our own pendulum is within that range, probably will determine over time the extent to which we're exposed to this risk. But clearly, this is something that is being thought about a lot in government, in the private sector, and by all of us, I'm sure.
In terms of 2017, I mean, this is January 2017. You're writing regularly on a lot of these topics in your blog posts. When you look out for this year, what do you see in terms of trends in digital technology?
Well, I think the convergence that I've been alluding to is going to continue to happen. I am really interested to see what's going on in automotive because if and when autonomous driving begins to take on more of a mainstream aspect, the repercussions of that are really going to be substantial. When you think of how dependent we are on driving for our mode of transportation, and in New York, we take that for granted a little bit, but in other parts of the country, people have long commutes. They need cars, just to go about their daily existence. If all of a sudden, these habits become disrupted by cars that just take care of everything on their own, urban planning, highway systems, consumer habits and requirements are all going to change very substantially. And that's something that will have ripple effects not only in automotive, but pretty much everything related to consumption. And the time frame of that, I don't know, it's necessarily 2017, but it's starting. And as it progresses, which will happen in 18, 19, and 20, I think we're going to see a lot of these changes begin to take shape, and it'll be impactful.
You mentioned automotive. How about financial technology? We talked about that earlier on in our conversation. Take a look, your crystal ball, open it up a little bit, and think about what do you think is going to happen in 2017 with related to FinTech particularly?
FinTech is a very complicated subject, because when you talk about people's money, I think there is an element to the whole subject that we've been discussing that transcends it in some ways. For obvious reasons, people are very careful with their money. The degree of trust is going to be very, very different when you're dealing with individual wealth and the transfer of individual wealth as compared to, purchasing a book, or sharing a photograph, on Facebook. When you're talking about making payments, when you're talking about receiving payments, when you're talking about managing your savings or your liquid assets. I think trust in the institution that is helping you to do this plays a major role. And so FinTech, to the extent that it can support that, I think is very valuable. It remains to be seen to what extent, as a category, startups that are coming up in FinTech can truly take the place of the established financial brands that have histories and longevity and trust in the marketplace. I think that's TBD, but obviously something to watch very carefully.
And let's not forget all the regulatory changes that we're going to expect
Of course.
this year. We've got the new Department of Labor fiduciary rules. So I think all that kind of comes together, and it's going to be an interesting year this year.
Absolutely. And an interesting maybe 5 years coming up.
Dan Ramsden, thank you so much for joining us on Staying Ahead of the Curve today.
A pleasure. Thank you.